The Inside the NBA crew disrespects the New York Knicks, and I'm here to break it all down. All that and much more on the Knicks Digest. What's up, guys? It's your boy Dariel from Knicks Digest. This Knicks slander lately, man, especially from the legends, is getting me annoyed. Last night on Inside the NBA, or actually I should say during the pregame show, Chuck, EJ, Kenny, and Shaq, they were talking about the trade deadline. They talked about different teams what they liked that they did, talking about the Knicks, talking about the Cleveland Cavaliers, all the different teams. But when they got to the Knicks, Shaq and Kenny, more so Shaq, had something that was completely crazy and he was completely out of line for saying. So if we take a look here, Shaq goes on to say, did it help the Knicks get better? Talking about the pickup of Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks. Yes. Did it help them win the championship? No. So it don't matter. Then he goes on to say, can they beat Boston? No. Can they beat Cleveland? No. Can they beat Milwaukee? No. Now, Boston, of course, I understand why he said no, because Jason Tatum, the duo of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, arguably is the best duo in the NBA. On top of that, they have amazing, like Shaq says, others, primarily being Kristaps Porzingis. But the thing with Kristaps Porzingis is that he is injury prone. And if you guys have been watching the videos that I've been putting out, and also Chris and I have been putting out, you know my stance on Kristaps. I don't know if he could be someone that can come through in the clutch, because the last few seasons it's been a lot of empty stats. Playing with the Washington Wizards, not really playing for a playoff berth. With the Dallas Mavericks, he had another generational type player in Luka, but he couldn't get along with Luka because at the time he thought that he was the best player on the team. But anyway, going back to Boston, I understand why Shaq said no. The next team on the list was Cleveland. He said the Knicks could not beat Cleveland. Last season, when the Knicks baptized Cleveland, winning in 5 games, with players like Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, who, in my opinion, has not taken that leap that a lot of us have expected as hoopers. To me, the reason why Cleveland, prior to this nice little, I think they won like 15 games straight because Darius Garland was out with a fractured jaw. Evan Mobley had knee surgery, but now they're back and they're trying to get into shape. But while they were out, I believe Cleveland went like 13, 14, 15 games straight, and Donovan Mitchell and Jared Allen were the primary reasons as to why they were on such a long winning streak. But again, going back to the playoffs last season, we completely baptized the Cleveland Cavaliers, winning in 5 games. And I think the primary reason is because Darius Garland, specifically Darius Garland and Evan Mobley, that was their first time in the playoffs, and the lights were a little bit too bright for them. They didn't exactly know how intense the playoff minutes were going to be, how more physical the playoffs games were going to be. Jared Allen went to the playoffs with the Brooklyn Nets. Donovan Mitchell, we know his past with the Utah Jazz, consistently going to the playoffs, but always being upset in the first round because the Utah Jazz were always a regular season darling, if you will, having amazing records, 50 wins, 55 wins, but in the playoffs always coming up short because Rudy Gobert, as their starting center, was literally only able to offer you something on one end of the floor. Offensively, he was not really able to offer you anything, but that's neither here nor there. But Shaq saying that the Knicks can't beat Cleveland Cavaliers is ridiculous. On top of that, this whole conversation was because of the addition of Bogdanovic and Alec Burks. Bogdanovic, who throughout his career has shown that he can be a player that's definitely going to show up when the lights are the brightest. I remember when he was with the Indiana Pacers and they took the Cleveland Cavaliers when LeBron was on that team still to 7 games, and Bogdanovic was one of the reasons why, 1, Indiana went to the playoffs, but 2, Indiana took Cleveland Cavaliers to 7 games. Victor Oladipo at that time was definitely the first option on that team. But Bogdanovic was another reason why the Indiana Pacers were able to get to the playoffs that season. The next team after the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, this is interesting because obviously Milwaukee Bucks, they have wherever you want to put him, if you want to put him as the best player in the league right now, the second best or the third best, Giannis is in that conversation. So the Milwaukee Bucks have Giannis. The Milwaukee Bucks have Damian Lillard. And Shaq said that they cannot beat Milwaukee. But what I think that Shaq and the Inside the NBA crew that they're actually not really looking at, they're not looking at Doc Rivers. Yo, Doc Rivers for the longest, he has straight up been underwhelming. He's been underachieving. He's been living off of his one championship in 2008 with the Boston Celtics when it was the big 3, Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, and KG. Ever since then, he's had talented teams. From Boston, he went to the Clippers with Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, JJ Redick, Jamal Crawford. Didn't do anything there. From the Clippers, he went to Philly, Joel Embiid, James Harden. He had Ben Simmons for a little bit before Ben Simmons went through his twilight zone of an era, whatever you want to call it. But Doc Rivers has been underwhelming. He has been underachieving since he won that championship. And being named to the top 15 NBA coaches of all time with one chip, don't even get me started on that. I think I saw a stat that Doc Rivers has had the most Hall of Famers throughout his coaching tenure. He's had the most Hall of Famers on his teams. And if you look at his winning record as far as expectations and championships, besides the Boston Celtics team, the Clippers, they were expected to make an NBA Finals run, and at times they were expected to win the NBA Finals. With the Philadelphia 76ers, they were expected to make a deep playoff run with James Harden and Joel Embiid, and they were underwhelming. They did not even reach the Eastern Conference Finals. And now with the Milwaukee Bucks, having Giannis, who is top 3 in the league right now, and who is in the top 75 players of all time, the pressure is on Doc, man. In my opinion, I don't think that Milwaukee needs to win the championship right now, this season, because Damian Lillard coming to the Milwaukee Bucks after playing his whole career with the Portland Trail Blazers, 2 top 75 players, they need time in order to develop chemistry. They need time in order to build camaraderie. There's a lot that goes into 2 top 75 players of all time just playing with each other. Right now, as I'm recording this, we're maybe 50% or a little bit more done with the NBA, with this NBA season. So some people might have the argument that they've had enough time to gel and develop that chemistry. But even though they've had the time to gel, they're also dealing with a coaching change. Adrian Griffin getting fired, that's a topic for another video. That was crazy. Even, I believe his record was like 30-15, 30-13, and he still got fired. And then they bring in Doc Rivers. So Damian Lillard, Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo, they're dealing with their chemistry. But then on top of that, they have to deal with a completely new coach who's going to insert different defensive schemes, different offensive schemes. That's a lot to take into one season. So, and on top of that, in my opinion, Damian Lillard is definitely on his last legs of being in his prime. He, in my opinion, has this season and next season, possibly the season after that, as far as a window into winning a championship with the Milwaukee Bucks. And that conversation is always interesting to me because whenever analysts or different people talk about teams that have windows, it's crazy because you can have a window for like maybe 2 or 3 seasons that you see in front of you, and then all of a sudden an injury happens. All of a sudden something happens. Maybe another team in your conference makes a really big move, and then your window is over like that. The Boston Celtics, going back to the Boston Celtics, they have had the most luck because their window of winning a championship was basically since Tatum was a rookie, which is, I don't know, back in 2016. Jason Tatum has been making deep playoff runs ever since he came into the league, and the Boston Celtics have not closed the deal. They need to win the championship, if anything, this season. I really do believe that after this season, the Boston Celtics, their window is not going to be open as much as people think that it is. And then you have Kenny Smith. Kenny Smith goes on to say and talk about his opinion about the Knicks trades and picking up Bogdanovich and Alec Burks. He goes on to talk about as far as the quality of players that are going to be on the court depending on the playoff matchups. He's talking about a Tatum and Brown. He's talking about a Donovan Mitchell. He's talking about Embiid and Maxey. He was talking about how the Knicks on paper, they definitely have the players on paper to compete with those teams, but do they have the best player on the floor? Now, as far as Philadelphia, so Embiid just went out with that meniscus tear. It looks like there's a lot of reports left and right saying that he is going to come back and try to make a run, and there are other reports saying that he's completely shut down for the season. In my opinion, man, I'm sorry, Joel. I love you as a basketball player. I think you are in the conversation, and if I take the time to think about it, you might be the most dominant big man ever. Just offensively, you have more of an offensive repertoire than Shaq. Shaq, of course, was dominant, but the thing with Shaq is just throw him the ball and he's going to use his brute force. Me, personally, I like a little bit of finesse into my game, so Joel Embiid can't put the ball on the floor. He has a three-point shot. He has the handles, and he has a Hakeem Olajuwon dream shake. He has the footwork. I call him Inception because he's the dream part 2. Hope you guys like that. But Joel Embiid is going to be out. I think Joel, in my personal opinion, I think he's going to sit it out. I think it's a wrap. I think it's going to be a wrap. He's not coming back for the season. And it's a shame because he undoubtedly would have won the MVP, 2 MVPs back to back, and he would have been in the same conversation as Jokic, even though he does duck the smoke from Jokic a little bit more than I would like. But I don't think, even if he does come back, Joel Embiid is going to have time in order to ramp up his conditioning, in order to get back into the offensive flow. Like, once you come back from surgery, it's not like, okay, I'm back and I'm ready to go again. You got to come back from surgery, make sure that you're just able to be a human being, And then when you find out that you're actually able to be a human being, that's when you have to ramp up and do your conditioning. Get used to the basketball again. Get used to the offensive flow. Get used to the schemes that the coach has for you. There's a lot of things that goes into it just after an injury. But Philadelphia 76ers, I don't think we're gonna have to worry about that. I'm not sure if the Knicks are gonna even have to face the Philadelphia 76ers in the playoffs because they have been on a losing slump since Embiid has been out, since he injured that knee against the Warriors. But as far as the other teams in the Eastern Conference, when we talk about the best players on the floor, let's take a look at Boston. So, in order, who are the best players on the floor? Boston, I think, is going to have the best player on the floor with Jason Tatum. But Jason Tatum is a question mark. There are a lot of basketball NBA analysts that don't know if they can trust Jason Tatum in a high-pressure situation. Look at how he played when he was going up against the Warriors in the NBA Finals. He didn't really show up. The only memory that I have of Jason Tatum showing up was when it was in Game 6 going into Milwaukee, where I believe he dropped 45 points against the Milwaukee Bucks. That was him quietly or even loudly shutting up the naysayers and saying that when it's time to perform, he's going to show up. Jason Tatum hasn't really had a great playoff showing where it's from beginning to end. He's better than definitely some other players like a la James Harden. Don't even get me started on James Harden. But as far as Jason Tatum and being the best player on the floor, depending on if they go against the Knicks, he will be the best player on the floor, but I think you have to put an asterisk next to his name because, again, there are gonna be moments where we're gonna need him to shine, and I'm not 100% confident that Jason Tatum can come through in the clutch. Now, after the first best player on the floor against the Knicks, if they were hypothetically going into a playoff situation, who is that second best player? I think the argument will be between Jaylen Brown and Jalen Brunson. My personal opinion, I think Jalen Brunson would be right behind Jason Tatum because Jaylen Brown, he's had examples in the past of not showing up. The best example I can think of is last season when it was Game 7 going up against the Miami Heat. Jason Tatum, on literally the first play, rolled his ankle, and you can tell for the rest of the game, he was pretty much not the same player. That was the perfect opportunity for Jaylen Brown to take the bull by the horns and just completely take over the game. But what ended up happening? He didn't end up doing that. There was also instances of him just not being able to handle the ball. There's been instances of the defense literally just making him go left because he can't dribble with his left hand. So that's why I would put Jalen Brunson right behind Jason Tatum as the best player on the floor. And Jalen Brunson, we've seen time and time again that he is going to show up when it counts. When he was with Dallas and Luka was injured for those 2 games against the Phoenix Suns, you got Jalen Brunson coming up big and being the best player on the floor. And of course, last season, going up against the Cleveland Cavaliers, the first round, they completely baptized them in 5 games. After that, they lost in 6 games to the Miami Heat. But in Game 6, I believe Jalen Brunson dropped like a 30 ball. Jalen Brunson again and again just keeps showing why he is underrated and why people keep surprising him with his offensive prowess and what he's able to bring to a team. So that's the Boston Celtics. Let's go to the Milwaukee Bucks. In the Milwaukee Bucks series hypothetical playoff situation, of course, Giannis is the best player on the team. That is probably the consensus, even though personally, I like my players to have a little bit of finesse, and Giannis, in my opinion, is literally just brute force. But I'm also not blind. I can also admit that Giannis would be the best player on the floor. The second best player on the floor should be Dame, no question. But the way that Dame has been playing this season, I'm not sure that we can just lock him in as being the second best player on the floor. Again, I think the argument could be made that Jalen Brunson would be the second best player behind Giannis. Again, Dame could completely just show up in the playoffs and just completely shut me up. But as up until this moment right now, what Dame has shown me for this season, I'm not taking his whole career into account. I'm talking about this season, what Dame has shown me. He's shown me that as far as defensively, he has big trouble with other point guards. And Jalen Brunson being the point guard against the Knicks and Damian Lillard not being a great defender, Jalen Brunson might be able to get the better of him. But against the Milwaukee Bucks, I think Jalen Brunson might be the second best player. Philadelphia, Joel Embiid is not going, in my opinion, I don't think he should come back. And if he doesn't come back, Joel Embiid will not be the best player on the floor because obviously he won't be on the floor. So I think Jalen Brunson would be the best player on the floor. And the second best player, I think, would actually be Julius Randle. And then the third best player might be Tyrese Maxey. A lot of people would say that Jimmy Butler would be the best player on the floor. But again, I don't know if I could just give that to Jimmy Butler right away. If, not to be dramatic, but gun to my head, I would choose Jimmy Butler as the best player on the floor in a hypothetical situation going up against the Knicks in a playoff situation. Because what Jimmy Butler has shown us, whenever April 26th comes around, the playoffs are literally the next day, Jimmy Butler turns into Jimmy Jordan time and time again, leading the Miami Heat to the championship in the bubble, facing against the Lakers, not winning it, but just getting to the finals. Being in Eastern Conference Finals pretty much every season except one season since he's been with the Miami Heat. Going to the finals against Denver. Nobody expected them to, one, beat Milwaukee in the first round, but then Giannis went out with a back injury, and then Jimmy Butler just swooped in there and took the crown and get the Milwaukee Bucks out of there in 5. Beating the Knicks the second round, and then beating the Boston Celtics in Game 7, even though they were up 3-0. That was crazy. But he ended up getting the Miami Heat to the NBA Finals against Denver with a team of one of the Martin twins. I'm not sure exactly which one it was. I believe it was Cody. Tyler Hero went out with a broken hand in the first round against the Milwaukee Bucks. It was basically Jimmy Butler, Bam, Kyle Lowry, Duncan Robinson. And I still don't understand how Jimmy Butler was able to do it. But that's why I would put Jimmy Butler as far as the best player on the floor as number 1. But Jalen Brunson, again, man, Jalen Brunson is going to be right behind that best player or even tied for that best player. As far as Kenny talking about Embiid and Maxey, Tatum and Brown, and I threw in Miami in there with Jimmy Butler, like the Knicks might not have the best player, but I feel like Jalen Brunson is always going to be in the conversation for being tied with the best player, or he's going to be right in that number 2 slot, right behind the best player on the floor. Now, Kenny also makes one final point talking about after all these trades, the Knicks still don't have the best player on the floor. He goes on to say that the Knicks should try and copy what the Detroit Pistons did in 2004 when the Detroit Pistons beat the star-studded Lakers, when it was Gary Payton, Karl Malone, Shaq, Kobe, even though Gary Payton and Karl Malone were literally on their last legs. The Detroit Pistons beat that Laker team by being a team. The Detroit Pistons' best player on the team was Chauncey Billups, but Chauncey Billups was not looked at as one of the better players in the league. Even though Chauncey Billups was highly disrespected, the Detroit Pistons didn't have that aura about them, about having a top 10 player in the league going up against a Kobe and a Shaq team. And Kenny was saying that that's what the Knicks are going to have to do. They're going to have to do it more by committee, more than relying on one player. And in that aspect, I might agree with Kenny. If Jalen Brunson is not the best player on the floor in a playoff situation, even though in my opinion he's maybe the second best player or tied for the first, they would have to do it by committee. But if you take a look into that, if they're doing it by committee, having Julius Randle as your number 2, having OG Anunoby shutting down the opposing team's best player, a Jason Tatum, a Tyrese Maxey, trying to shut down a Giannis, because not anybody can shut down Giannis, but they could try and make it difficult for him. Like, you have these pieces at each position with Bojan Bogdanovic insurance, with Julius Randle with playoff experience. Like, you have these pieces in different positions that, man, it just makes the team have a lot more depth. It makes the team a lot more deeper. And I feel like just everything is lined up for the Knicks right now to make a really, really deep playoff run. And when I say a deep playoff run, I don't mean second round. I am talking about minimum Eastern Conference Finals. So we'll see what happens this season. But guys, let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what you think about Kenny's remarks, Shaq's remarks, and my remarks. Do you think Jalen Brunson going up against the Boston Celtics, the Philadelphia 76ers if they had a healthy Joel Embiid, the Miami Heat, do you think Jalen Brunson would be the best player on the floor, tied for first best player on the floor, or the number 2 best player on the floor? Let me know in the comments, and let me know what you guys think, if you agree with me or not. But until next time, guys, you guys know it's always Taj Gibson for president, Jalen Brunson for MVP, and I'm also going to start saying Jalen Brunson for Finals MVP, and we out. Peace.